Guys, welcome back to The Occasional Angler. We do tips, trips and advice for all you anglers out there who are born to fish but forced to work. So for the last season I've mainly been concentrating on light lure fishing and I've really enjoyed it. I've got a lot of enjoyment out of going out there, being mobile and fishing for quite big fish sometimes with very light equipment. With the new season fast approaching, I thought I would do a video for some of you guys out there who might be thinking about starting light lure fishing. So what I'm going to do, run down in this video, is why you'd want to get into light lure fishing, what gear you need to do that, when to go light lure fishing and where to go light lure fishing. So let's get into it. So one of the attractions about light lure fishing is you could possibly catch anything when you do it, and I have, and don't just think it's predatory fish. I've caught roach light lure fishing, I've even caught carp. So, but mainly when you go light lure fishing, the fish which you're targeting are mainly perch, chub, pike and zander. The second reason why you'd want to get into light lure fishing is you're light and mobile. It's really great to be really light and moving around. So it's very much like hunting in a way. You see all the guys down at the lakes carp fishing, and they've got their wheelbarrows full of stuff, and it's a real slog for them to move around. Well, with light lure fishing, you grab a rod, a reel, a few lures, a pair of polarizing lenses, a net and something to de-hook the fish on, and you go and you start walking and you find the fish. So it's really good. You can get out there and be as mobile as you want. The third reason why I would suggest light lure fishing or finesse lure fishing is really good is because of the balance of the gear. So you're using really nice light fishing gear, so there's a lot of sport involved in this. Unlike again with carp fishing, where you've got extremely powerful rods which are designed to launch a 3 or 4 ounce lead over the horizon line, with this it's much more intimate. So you're using rods which can cast lures down to half a gram sometimes, and you know what, you sometimes catch some really big fish. Like I've caught carp. I caught a carp last season which was about 14 pounds on 6 pound line, and you get one hell of a fight out of a fish like that. So it's really nicely balanced, and I think that's one of the big attractions with light lure fishing. One of the last things, the fourth reason, is it's cheap. It's quite a cheap thing to actually get into, so you're not going to have to invest in optonics and all those other bits and pieces, rod rests and all that kind of stuff. You just need a rod, a reel, some line, a few lures, a net, a de-hooking mat, some polarizing lenses and a good pair of legs, and you're out there. So let's get on to some of the gear which you need for light lure fishing. So it is quite a cheap sport to get started in. Obviously it's a sliding scale. There is some extremely expensive rods and reels out there. Quite often it's the Japanese domestic market or JMD tackle, which, you know, you can spend hundreds and hundreds of pounds on a rod and a reel, and you know, the sky's the limit basically. But the beauty of this kind of fishing is you're targeting smaller fish. So the rods, you can use cheaper rods and still get just as much fun out of it. So let's have a look at some of the things. Rods, first of all, let's start with rods. So there's two types of rods. Essentially, there's your classic spinning rod, and that's what a lot of us anglers here in the UK use, and we're used to that. And for starting light lure fishing, that's what I would suggest you get first of all. The second type of rod is a bait casting rod, where you use a multiplier or a bait casting reel, everything flips over. The more advanced light lure fishermen are really getting into this now. There's a new wave of fishermen doing something called BFS fishing, which is bait finesse system fishing, which is essentially casting extremely light weights, which you could only used to be able to get away with on spinning gear, now on bait casting gear. Again, this is much more advanced, and if you're just getting into this light lure fishing game, I would just stick with your standard spinning stuff, because you can easily get yourself into a complete muzzle when it goes into BFS stuff. So with the rods, they can come in multi-piece or one piece. Purists would say one-piece rods you can't really match because they haven't been cut and then put back together again in a multi-piece rod. So they basically have got a lot more strength and feel. That said, the technology has moved on a huge amount these days. Multi-piece rods are excellent, really, really excellent. So my suggestion would be to get a multi-piece rod, just because it's much easier to sort of move around with you when you go out. So rod lengths, they go from anywhere from 5 foot up to 9 foot generally. I mean, there are exceptions. There are really, really small rods and they're really, really long rods, but 5 to 9 foot is your kind of standard ranges for light lure fishing. So what you get with a shorter rod is more accuracy, essentially. And what you get with a longer rod is the potential to be able to cast a little bit further. And say if you're fishing on a river, it gives you the opportunity to sort of get over some of the shrubbery which you might find there. So depending on what your circumstances and what your local water is like, then make a decision based on that. They come in a variety of actions. Now, you'll hear people talk about fast action rods or slow or medium action rods, and that is to do with the curve in the rod, the way it essentially reacts when it's put under pressure. Fast action rods, just the very tip, the fast, extra fast and really fast action rods, it's just the tip section which moves, and the rest of the butt section of the rod stays quite stiff. That's good. Well, it comes down to personal preference. Personally, I like both, and they've all slower action rods curve all the way through to the butt section. They've got different sort of pros and cons. I mean, a fast action rod will set the hook better because it's got more backbone further down the rod, so you can apply a little bit more pressure. But then a slower action rod, which bends all the way through to the butt section, can cast lighter lures a little bit better sometimes because it loads up, so it can sort of spring out. It's again completely down to preference. What you'll find is some of the more expensive lure fishing rods, some of the really expensive ones, tend to be faster action. It's not always the case, but they do tend to be. So the casting weights which you'll be getting with light lure fishing. So typically when you're light or finesse lure fishing, the rods will be rated from anywhere from 0.5 of a gram up to maybe 10 grams. Some of them go a bit heavier, up to 12 or 15 grams, but for ultralight finesse lure fishing, typically I'm looking for stuff which goes from about 0.5 of a gram up to 7 grams. That's my preference, but up to 10 grams or even up to 15 grams will be fine. Manufacturers, there's a whole host of people who make this kind of gear now. I mean, I'll sort of tell you a few of the sort of better known makes. So there's companies like Savage Gear who do very, very sort of well priced and good quality equipment. Daiwa make some excellent light lure rods. The Gekhaben rod is excellent. basically anything by Shimano is going to be good. Same with Daiwa. Fox Rage, they specialise in some really nice little light lure rods. Westin, again, a little bit more specialised but really nice rods. Quantum, BFT, that's Big Fish Tackle. Major Craft, that's a sort of Japanese rod manufacturer, but they do some more entry level light lure rods which are more affordable. Tail Walk, again, that's a fully blown JMD tackle. The list goes on, but some of the ones which I just mentioned there are some of the big ones, and you can definitely rely on those. So if I was going to give you a suggestion for a rod which I would definitely look at if I was getting into light lure fishing, I would suggest going onto AliExpress and getting yourself a Kuying, that's Kuying, Teton. They make some excellent rods. Everybody raves about them. They're extremely cheap for what you get, and I think they're a perfect starting place if you're getting into light lure fishing. So reels. Now, reels are, in my opinion, are the most important part of a sort of light lure fishing setup, because they have to do a lot of the work. That said, because we are generally fishing for smaller fish, you can get away with much cheaper reels, and they're absolutely perfectly capable of doing everything we want. Obviously, if your budget can stretch, you can get something much nicer. So there are two types of fishing reel in this category. So there's the classic spinning reel, the egg beater reel. So that's generally, again, what most of us in the UK are used to have been using for a long time. It feels comfortable. And if I was suggesting that you're getting into light lure fishing, I would suggest that you first of all start with light spinning setups and then move on if you want to. The second type of reel is a baitcaster reel, which requires just a little bit more getting used to. In America, they're used across the board, probably used more than spinning reels, but over here not so much, and they're still brilliant, and the technology on them has moved on a lot. When they first came out, you used to get a lot of casting knots and all kinds of problems. These days they're much better, but for starting off, I would just go with the spinning. So sizes of reels, well, spinning reels can go all the way from a 500 size, which is the smallest spinning reel, up to 20,000, which is your kind of big game popping spinning reel, which can haul in a 200-pound tuna. Obviously, we're not after that. We're after little perch and chub. So for me, anything from a size 500 up to a size 2,500 would be perfect. Typically, I use a size 100 reel, 1,000 reel, sorry, and that's perfect sizing for this kind of fishing. Manufacturers, in my eyes, there's really only two reel manufacturers, and that would be Shimano. Shimano have a rich history in making gearing. If you don't know, Shimano make some of the best bike gears in the world, and a lot of that technology filters into fishing. In fact, Tiagra gearing is used in Tiagra reels, big game reels, and is also used, for example, in gearing for race bikes. Ultegra, exactly the same. So for me, Shimano, and then second, Daiwa. I mean, you really can't go wrong with either of these two brands. Even their absolute budget entry-level reels will do for what we're talking about. But I would generally stick with those two manufacturers, and you'll be happy with what you get. My suggestion and what I use for my light lure fishing is a Shimano Stradic. It's the sort of best of both, really. I mean, Shimano reels can be extremely expensive. There's no doubting that. I mean, if you want to drop £500 on a light lure reel, it is completely possible to do that. You don't need to. I mean, like, you just don't need to. Shimano Stradics have got excellent drag systems. They're really nice and light, brilliant line lay. Basically, you can't go wrong with them, and that would be my suggestion for a reel if you're looking to get into this, and I'd get that in the 1000 size. Right, so you've got your rod and your reel. Now you're going to need to put some line on this reel. So we've got several options here, 3 really. So you've got monofilament. That's your standard monofilament line. It's what people have been using since the beginning of time with fishing. Monofilament's cheap. It basically does what it says on the tin, and it's brilliant. So don't shy away from using monofilament. I mean, there's loads of new lines out there which claim to be this, that and the other, and I'm sure they are, but you really can't go wrong with monofilament line. So if you're thinking about getting into it, definitely look at monofilament. There are different grades of monofilament, and as with a lot of things in light lure fishing, if you can get the Japanese lines, they tend to be a lot better than everybody else's. So look at those. The next one is fluorocarbon. Now, fluorocarbon's relatively new. Fluorocarbon has a few sort of benefits over monofilament. Firstly, it's got the reflective index of water. What does that mean? Well, essentially it means it's invisible in the water, at least that's what we've been told. So it gives you that extra stealthy presentation in the water if you've got fish which can be a bit finicky. It's used a lot by fly fishermen to sort of get their flies down in the water column, because fluorocarbon does not float. It sinks like a rock, whereas monofilament can float. So just be aware of those two things. So if you're using surface lures, for example, monofilament would be a better option than using fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon also is much more abrasion resistant, to the point where I've managed to catch and land pike, not on purpose, but when I'm using fluorocarbon line, 6 pound fluorocarbon line, and it's managed to avoid being cut by the pike's teeth, whereas monofilament almost certainly would have done. We'll get onto that a little bit later on, but fluorocarbon is much more abrasion resistant. Fluorocarbon also transmits vibrations from bites better, but, and this is the caveat, on a slack line, not on a taut line. So when the line's just going slack through the water, it transmits bite detection really well, better than braid actually. And also, what's the last one? Fluorocarbon is also quite expensive. So because it's a new technology, harder to make, fluorocarbon is generally a lot more expensive than monofilament. The third line is braided line. So typically within light lure fishing, people tend to use braided line as a backing. You can't, or I would suggest that you wouldn't want to use braided line all the way through to your lure. One of the main reasons is, although it's incredibly thin and incredibly strong for its thin diameter, it's also very visible, and you're not going to get that finesse presentation which you're looking for in light lure fishing. So typically within light lure or finesse lure fishing, people use a braided backing line, and then they connect up to a fluorocarbon leader, which is about 2 meters long. Or if they're trying to surface fish, they might use a monofilament leader. Braided line is quite expensive again, although it's coming down in price quite quickly. You can get different strands, so basically the higher the strand, that means the number of strands which interweave to make the actual the line. 8 braided braid at the moment is quite reasonably priced. You can sort of get it for about £15-20. You can get 16 braided line now, bit more expensive. I think you're sort of going up into the £30 bracket, and that's just smoother. It's got a smoother finish, runs through the guides a bit better. Braided line, also you can get casting knots with it, and if it does backlash, it can be a nightmare to get out. It's much more prone to that than some of the spinning lines. However, when you're spinning, when you're casting all the time, the line can get a lot of sort of wraps in it. And what I mean by that is the line just sort of goes round and round when you're bringing it in on a spinning reel, and that can affect monofilament and fluorocarbon line quite a lot, and it starts sort of like wrapping up, whereas it doesn't affect braided lines so much. So there is definitely an advantage there. One other thing which I was going to say about this, actually there was something I was going to tell you about fluorocarbon line. Fluorocarbon line can get very stiff in the winter time when the temperatures get cold, whereas braided line generally is good all the way around throughout the whole year. So I mean, there's some sort of pluses and minuses across the board, but typically people do use braided backing and a fluorocarbon leader. With my suggestion, if you're first getting into all of this, what I did was, because connecting fluorocarbon line or monofilament to braided line requires using some very specific knots, and it holds very, very well, but you have to get good at doing those knots. You have to use like an Alberta knot to do it, or an FG knot, and they're quite complex knots to do. So what I did for the first season was I got a really high quality fluorocarbon main line, and what I got was a company called Sunline make a fluorocarbon line called FC Sniper. So my suggestion would be to load your spinning reel up with FC Sniper 6-pound line. That's a really, really good balance. 6-pound is my sweet spot for light lure fishing, and you won't have to then connect fluorocarbon leaders up. In fact, it's just straightforward, go out and go fishing with it. So when you're going light lure fishing, you're typically fishing for perch, pike, chub and zander. Now, 2 of those fish don't have teeth, so perch and chub don't have teeth. If you're targeting them, you tend to use fluorocarbon leaders. I use a 6-pound leader, or monofilament, again 6 pounds. If you're targeting pike or zander, it's imperative that you use a bite leader. You can't use just monofilament or fluorocarbon, because both of those fish have teeth and they will bite through it. In that situation, you need to use a bite leader, and I have used loads and loads of different types of wire leaders. They tend to kink quite a lot, the sort of multi-stranded wire leaders, and eventually I've sort of landed up using titanium wire, which is Nittol wire. I use a 12-pound Nittol wire, and the beauty of this stuff is that it doesn't kink, so it just goes on and goes on. It's a single stranded wire. If you look at a company called Not Too Kinky, they make a really good knit-hole wire. And also there is a company called Cara Knit-hole, and both of those companies supply this wire, and I'd get a £12 leader from those guys. I've done a video on how to tie that up. You can actually knot it, which is also a really great advantage of using that stuff. So go and check out my £6 titanium leader video on my channel, and that will show you exactly how to knot that. Right, okay, so we're getting to the end of this gear stuff which you need. So the last things you need are a de-hooking mat. Now, I use a Spro Freestyle light mat. You can purchase this from Angling Direct. If you don't want to spend that kind of money, then I used to use a little bit of wrapped up foam mattress which I had, so you know, one of those camping mattresses. I just cut one of those out and I used to just wrap that up and take that with me, wrap it around the handle of your landing net. That's a really good cheap option. I mean, they do the same thing. As long as you're looking after the fish when they come onto the bank, then you're golden basically. The next thing you need is a landing net. You don't need a huge landing net because the fish which you're typically going to be targeting with this kind of fishing are going to be small. So like a little trout net is good. You can look again on some of the online tackle distributors like Angling Direct, Glasgow Angling, Dragon Direct, I think, or Dragon Fishing. They do quite a lot of cheap stuff, and I'd probably look at something like a sort of folding trout net, which you can just clip onto the back of your jacket or hang out of your back pocket. They usually have a little clip, so those are good. You're going to need a little tackle box. Now, I would just go for something really small first of all. You know, the problem is tackle boxes, if you start loading yourself up with big tackle boxes, it's not going to be easy. You're not going to be that mobile. You're going to be forever sort of trying to choose and pick between different different lures. Just get a little small tackle box, put a couple of lures which you know you can catch fish on, and just get out there and start walking. It's much more about trying to find the fish than the lure. And finally, you're going to need a pair of polarizing sunglasses. With this kind of fishing, you're walking, you're trying to go and find the fish, and in the summertime especially, when you've got a lot of sunlight out there reflecting on the surface of the water, you will not see the fish through that. Polarizing lenses cut out that glare so you can see through the water and actually see those fish. So it is definitely worth going out there and getting yourself some polarizing lenses. Again, if you want to go cheap, go onto AliExpress and you can pick up a pair of polarizing sunglasses for about £3. Okay, so you've got your rod, you've got your reel, you've got your line. Right, we need to put a lure on here now. This is a huge topic and I can't go into too much detail with this because there is a plethora of different lures out there. But when you're light lure fishing, the beauty of it is that you can be super mobile, so you don't need to take loads of lures with you. I've got 3 lures which I really think are really rate, and I think if you take these 3 lures with you, you've got a really good chance, if you cast it in front of a feeding fish, of catching it. So these are my top 3 light lures which I would take and start with, and then you can expand your lure collection. So the first one for summer fishing is the Mepps Bug Spinner. Spinners have sort of gone out of fashion really, but on rivers, on my river locally, and all the rivers which I go to really, spinners just do so well. They're excellent, and the Mepps Bugs are really small little spinners. If you put that in front of a chub or a perch, it will snaffle it straight away. I found the white ones to be the best. They seem to, for some reason, they just do really, really well. They get a lot of attention because they're bright white. So the white Mepps bug spinner would be my number one lure. The next one, which I'd go ahead and purchase, is the Fish Arrow Flash J. Now this is a soft plastic minnow imitation, so you need to put it onto a little jig head. I'll show you how to do that now. And these have got a little bit of silver foil inserted inside them, and when you're bringing them along they just look so realistic, but the foil, when it catches the light, just gives a flash, and I've caught so many fish on these that it's not even funny really. They're brilliant. They're just absolutely one of the best soft plastics I've ever used. The third one would be the Z-Man Grubs. Again, it's another soft plastic. It's got a curly tail on it. It's small. I'd go for like the sort of 2-inch ones. You can go for something really bright white, or you can go for a more sort of like natural motor oil colour. Again, really, really durable, and you'll catch fish with them. So those are my top 3. So when do you want to go light lure fishing? You can light lure fish throughout the whole season. Typically the summertime, the fish, when it's warmer, the fish are much more active. So you want to trigger that predatory response with probably slightly faster moving lures. So spinners tend to work really well in the summertime when they're sort of just coming through the water column quite quickly. That flash from the spinner will kind of trigger that predatory response from a fish, and it will come out and nab it quickly. As the year goes on and the temperatures become cooler, the fish start to sort of like settle down a bit, and what you'll find is you'll slowly have to slow down your retrieve essentially until you get into sort of middle of winter and sort of early January, February fishing time, when it's quite cold. And then you can slow your lure fishing right down, and it tends to be much more about fishing right on the bottom of the water column, or on the actual bottom of the river. Whereas in the summertime, really surface lures and fast moving really crankbaits and spinners are much more the sort of norm. So winter time, just remember, slow it right down, and when it gets really cold, slow it right down. I mean, you can use lures which you can literally dead stick on the bottom of the river, and fish will take it. In fact, that's a really good technique for catching big perch in January and February. So where do you go light lure fishing? Well, first of all, what I would do is go out to your local water, and I'd just take my polarizing lenses and I'd go walking around and see if you can actually see where the fish are. A lot of fishing is about actually fishing where the fish are, and if you're not fishing where they are, you're not going to catch them, even if you're the best fisherman in the world. So find the fish first of all. That is imperative. Once you'll get an idea of where they hang out. So I'm going to give you some sort of rough ideas of where to look. Structure. Fish tend to stick to structure. Now, what do I mean by structure? So structure is overhanging trees, areas where it goes from deep water to shallow water, shadow lines, bridges. All of these places, predatory fish have to rely on being able to come out and quickly nab their prey. So they use structure to hide. They'll hide behind rocks, they'll hide behind tree roots, they'll hide in weed, underneath a sort of bank where the river dips down into some really deep water. They'll just sit waiting for something to come over the top of them. So find that structure and you've got much greater chance of catching the fish. but go out, have a look around, use your eyes, and if you can find good bits of structure, and often you'll see the fish hanging around there, that's always a good place to start. Also, look to where bait fish are hanging around. Now, you'll see small little minnows hanging in certain areas, like in slack water, quite often near drains. They'll hang around near lily pads, reeds. Find that water. That's what the predatory fish feed on. So find the minnows, find the bait fish, and that again is another good place to go. For me, I tend to fish first thing in the morning. I've always found fishing first thing in the morning and last thing in the evening the most productive. So that is when I would be planning to go out and do my fishing. Get there before everybody else. Get down there and, you know, be the first person on the water. It's a magical experience, and you'll really, really enjoy it. And once you start catching fish, you'll be hooked. So look, I hope all of these tips have helped you. I love making these videos, and I hope you enjoy them. If you do, please like and subscribe. And again, best of luck with your own fishing adventures.